Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Laura with Connect My Brain. So glad that you are tuning in. I think this is a very important series to be part of where we are really talking about stress. And I'm titling these not just a 6 letter word because unfortunately, I think what happens a lot is that we just throw this word out there. I'm so stressed out. He's stressed. It was just because of stress. Or you might even hear somebody say, no, I'm really not stressed. But if you were to really look at the situation and even more importantly, test them, you'd be able to see how many people are actually walking around in a chronic state of stress. And I just cannot emphasize this enough that when it goes on for a chronic period of time, and chronic, I think, is also equal to, or we got to combine the idea of intensity because some stress is very important for our bodies to know how to go through. So we're not suggesting that you shouldn't have any stress, but today stress just seems to become or has become a way of life and not really understanding the impact of it. So when we left off last time, I asked you to start working on breathing. How many of you out there actually did that? I'm listening. Okay. So this is probably one of the greatest tools that you have. You don't have to go buy anything. You don't have to join anything. You have right in your own body one of the greatest biofeedback mechanism, and it's the breath. So before we dive into the meat and potatoes of today's talk, let's really understand the power of breathing. So if you happen to be driving along and you can safely put a hand on your belly or maybe do it at a stoplight and notice, are you actually breathing through your belly? If you are at home, can you feel your belly expand when you take a deep breath in? When you do this, you're literally pulling down your lungs bilaterally on both sides. And they have these adorable cells called alveolar cells. And it's like a sponge. And I just kind of imagine like Pac Man filling each of those holes with oxygen. If we're only breathing at the top part of our lungs, we're never getting that full expansion. We're never breaking pattern of stress. We are only aggravating the system even more. So I just cannot emphasize enough how important it is to learn how to breathe. And we talked about the way you can kind of figure out how you breathe is place one hand on your chest and one hand on your belly. Now, if you're driving, you're not testing. But if you're at home and you can sit down or lay down or somewhere where you can stop and put one hand on your chest and one hand on your belly, take a breath. Take a deep breath, what you would constitute a deep breath. Which hand moves first? If that upper hand moves first, you are not getting that full breath. And so we need to pull it down into the abdomen. But unfortunately, especially women, we're always taught to suck our bellies in. And sometimes we are altering that pattern of breath just by the way that we're holding our body. Or maybe you were taught that you should tuck your pelvis to protect your low back. You're altering your posture. That is not the way to hold your body. So we should be able to do this through the trunk. Okay, so that's still going to be our homework. But if you have been practicing, there is so much that you can do with the power of the breath. One of the things that I really like to advise people or recommend to people to do is to use essential oils. Now, if you've kind of already identified yourself as having a heightened stress response, the right side of your brain is your emotional quotient. The left side of your brain is your intellectual quotient. The nose is the only special sense that does not cross over. So, what we want to do is pick scents that are known to be determined or identified in the right side of the brain, and that's pungent aromas like cinnamon and peppermint and frankincense and myrrh, things with deep aromas. Vetiver, the left side is more sweet and flowery. So you could literally practice your breath by occluding, let's say we're going to go into that emotional quotient and really work on the right side of the brain. We can occlude the left side of our nose, breathe in through the right, and pause at the top, then occlude the right side and exhale out the left side. So in with the right, out with the left, and having a pause in between. Okay. Now, what you're really starting to do is to follow a pattern that's practiced when people do biofeedback, known as heart rate variability, which is literally considered the gold standard for determining what kind of balance do you have in your autonomic nervous system. Now, your autonomic nervous system stands for the things that run like an automatic pilot. And you've got two components. You've got your sympathetic nervous system, or what we know as fight or flight. And then we've also got our parasympathetic nervous system, which is rest, feed, and breed. Now, last time we also talked about dysautonomia, which it's now like a regular word I hear in the clinic as well as in conversation, that so many people have identified themselves or have been told, and now they have something to validate what they're feeling, and they come across and they say, I have dysautonomia. So dysautonomia stands for an imbalance between the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, a couple of things. Last time I gave you a whole list of all the things that are associated with dysautonomia. So instead of spending the time on that today, go back and listen to stress, not just a 6-letter word, the first one. And then the other part of this is I want us to be careful about wearing labels to identify ourselves. A lot because I work in the brain. And your brain listens to you. And if we go around and we claim, I have dysautonomia, I have this, I have that, then your brain starts searching for it. And remember what we said last time, the longer we stay in these chronic stress patterns, then we start giving up real estate in our brain. And now maybe we can't remember things quite like the way we used to. Maybe we're overloaded with fatigue. Maybe we've lost interest in things that we used to have interest in. So I want us to be careful. It doesn't mean that I don't want you to care for yourself. I absolutely want you to, but I want you to care for yourself. I don't want you just to hang a hook and say, this is what I've got. This is who I am, because that's where you're going to stay. Now, when we talk about the autonomic nervous system having both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, the thing we also have to realize, these are not, they're not reactions that are pathological, okay? Can stress take us in a negative direction? Absolutely. But some stress is important. But they also run other things in our body, like our breath. When you take a deep breath in, that is your sympathetic nervous system. So we need it to be in balance so that you can take a very deep diaphragmatic breath. The exhale is driven by the parasympathetics, rest, feed, breed, and it is meant to be longer than the inhale. So, what I want you to imagine when you're practicing your breath, I like this image we have on one of our biofeedback slides, but it looks like a slide. And because I do a lot with kids, of course, that's what I look for is the playground effect. So it literally looks like I am the yellow ball. And as that yellow ball moves up, that's when I'm breathing in. There's a platform at the top of the little diagram on the slide, and it's a couple of milliseconds pause. And then it's like you're writing down the slide. So that might be an imagery that works for you as well. So you want that inhale to be strong, robust from the belly, pause at the top, and then twice as long with the exhale. Now, when you actually are doing things like biofeedback, like with maybe a respiration belt and a heart monitor, we're actually able to see what's going on with the breath and what's going on with the heart, because those are systems that work together. And what we should see up on the screen of the system is we should see your breath be able to look like the pattern of the slide. Meanwhile, your heart rate goes up when you inhale, and then your heart rate goes down. So there's a known pattern. We're also looking how many breaths or how many heartbeats in each breath cycle. This is where you have the definition of heart rate variability. So let's say in that first breath cycle, there's 8 heartbeats. Maybe in the next one, there's 12. Maybe in the next one, there's 10. So they're different every cycle, which means that when your nervous system gets up to a place where it would elevate the heart rate to the 8-beat level in a breath cycle, you can handle it. When your nervous system is dealing with something and now your heart rate goes up to 12 in a breath cycle, you can handle it. And the same thing is true if it was 10 heartbeats, 16 heartbeats, 24, etc. So there's variance in each breath cycle or every few breath cycles, showing that you can handle a variety of situations and still stay in balance. So when we do a stress response test, we're actually able to see, can the heart rate have that flexibility when it has to come encounter with stress? And does the heart rate variability pattern reflect balance? And therefore, that individual has met the gold standard of showing cardiac flexibility and respiratory flexibility, which can absolutely be beneficial for global health. Because when we are stressed, it changes our heart rate. When we are stressed, it changes our breath. So some stress is good, right? So let's look at that from an exercise level. I want my heart rate to go up when I'm doing aerobic activity, and your breath rate goes up. And then you should have a time really within about 5 minutes of an aerobic activity, your respiratory center should level off, because now the delivery system is actually proficiently getting oxygen to the entire body. But when we have chronic stress, we don't have that same delivery. And one of the things, especially having gone through what we've all been through and wearing a mask, we were really cutting off our own oxygen. And that is completely attached to the arousal state in the brainstem. And your brain will go into a fight or flight when oxygen is inefficient within 20 seconds. So when all of this was going on and masks were required, we were checking everybody's oxygen, because one of the components that we do here at CMB is aerobic activity. And I would not want to put somebody who was already at a deficit, and you monitor it with a pulse oximeter. You can look at the pulse, you can look at the oxygen saturation rate. And if somebody is already in a deficit, I would not push their body into further stress. Now, if you have been through a stressful season, and we can definitely have seasons, and then you're starting to feel better and you're ready to kind of step back into things, have you ever experienced that you didn't have the same gusto to exercise, or you actually felt more fatigued when you got done exercising, when previously it energized you? Well, that just means that your body, you've got to be considerate of your body. It's going to have to walk back into things slowly. You're going to have to modify a workout in order to make sure that your system can deliver blood flow, deliver oxygen, because it stress will tear you down, and you need an opportunity to repair. So what I thought I would really get some meat and potatoes today of looking at stress is, what does it really look like in a child? Chronic stress, okay? What does chronic stress look like in an adult? And I'm going to then split up adult between a young adult, a middle-aged adult, and an elderly adult, okay? Because I think if we can identify if you are experiencing some of these things, or your child is, it should bring more clarity to the message. So again, chronic stress, I talk about development a lot. So we're going to just kind of take those volumes of information and put them over here, because I really want to connect some dots on a more current level. But chronic stress can be anything that you go through that you can't get out of easily. So there's not a specific timeline. But what really drew me to this topic is because of the amount of stress that we've been living through for the last 3 years, and because there seems to be still so much roller coaster in our world, and just even that kind of a feeling, the uncertainty of it all can make somebody feel stressful. So stress is a physiological event. It is absolutely in our system. It is perfectly normal to have stress. But if it doesn't turn off, this is where we're going to call it chronic. You can think about your air conditioner. If you set your air conditioner for 70 and the temperature in the room goes up to 71, 72, there is an automatic turning on of the air conditioner. And then as the temperature in the room drops, it shuts off. That is the easiest way to understand how our stress response is supposed to function. It should come on, it should handle, it should bring the appropriate chemical bath into the body, but then it should turn off. When it doesn't, it is going to then begin to lay down an entirely different pattern. So, some of the things that are being reported to me by parents about their children is many of them are feeling this loss. And I'm going to kind of go from maybe high school backwards, but feeling a loss because many kids didn't get to go to prom. Many kids didn't really get to have an expected graduation. And there's a loss because these are still milestones that you go through. And one of the things that has been identified, especially in the autistic population, was the greatest thing that influenced higher risk in a pregnant mother was suffering a loss. So what were they studying? They were studying cortisol in the body. So when you're a child, you can't really make sense of all this stuff, and you can't answer the whys. It just is, and you're just kind of expected to deal with it. Even though I know we've had lots of compassion for them and we should, but still there was really nothing that could be done to turn it in another direction. So it's going to be something that kind of goes along with them. And then as we move back more into middle school, it seems like that particular age group became very withdrawn, and they no longer really wanted to participate in extracurricular activities. And I don't believe it's that they really didn't want to participate. I think they were really scared, and staying closer to home, staying closer to mom or dad gave them their anchor. Because again, always remember, children do not have a point of reference to tell you, hey, because of what we just went through, I don't really want to get too far away from you. The interesting part is we as the adults, we don't have a point of reference for this either. So we were in our own space trying to navigate what was going on, and our children were having to go through what they were going through. There were children that were isolated. There were children that really couldn't wear masks, and then it just created an uproar, which is very easy to understand the stress. You had parents going and trying to advocate, and it just couldn't happen. It was a very different situation. As we move down that timeline, we've discussed this point before, but they've already been looking at the cognition of our younger children. And what has been reported over and over and over again is language delay and social interaction delay. And those are two very big parts of pediatric assessment. So we have gross motor, fine motor, social, communication, and then adaptation. In many podcasts, I've talked about adaptation because this is really where it all leads. If we don't know how to understand what it is like to interpret sound and build language, then it literally can create a state of confusion. But I've got to learn how to adapt, and it's an innate response. So that child is going to continue. And if we don't have points of reference, even as adults, we're not sure. And then the CDC goes and changes the developmental milestones. I'm still just blown away by that, because you can't just have a board of people sitting around a table and just randomly decide that it's okay if your child doesn't speak by this time. It's okay if your child doesn't walk by this time, because really what it means is we have an abundance of developmental delay. We have an abundance of anxiety and stress. We have an abundance of maybe even getting irritable and oppositional, because you got to remember, when we're having stress, the continuum can go either towards being over aroused, or it can be under aroused. And I do like to equate the word arousal with attention. And this has also really impacted, because of the stress response, has impacted the ability for our children to pay attention, to learn, to be part of that dynamic journey. I know that I am a life learner, and therefore I can't even imagine that I would have that taken from me, and then to have no point of reference as it missing in my life. Then what are you supposed to do with it? You know, I go around and I speak to parents, I speak to doctors, I speak to other professionals, and I share development, pediatric development with them. And back when all of this got started, I was supposed to go to Paris to a pediatric research conference and present, and that was taken. So I understand the loss, but I also lost my platform, and I am a communicator, and I love to teach. And this is literally how this podcast got its genesis, was because of what we went through. I started off all by myself. I had one other person that did web work, and she really helped me start my podcast. But then when I met Marcy, she just helped me take it to a whole new level, and we're getting it out there. And people they call in and they go, "Hey, I want to know where that podcast was, and I'm listening to your podcast." And it's making a difference because we're getting information out there. And please share this. If you have any question whatsoever about your child and how your child might be handling things today, then just send us a message right through the website. Always remember, tell me about your schedule. This is the way that I can get back to you very quickly. And I always call back and I always respond. I believe in communicating, and I love kids, and I want to help get our kids back on track. So, what does it look like for a young adult? My opinion of what's happening with the young adults, and I'm going to say this is in our 20s towards our 30s, that it's easier to just kind of act like some of this stuff isn't happening, or that it didn't happen, because they went into their own milestone. And that milestone is their beginning of their young adult life. And so, again, it's a loss. Heading down a few more years, is there has been such an increase in our young people not wanting to have children. And I don't think it's just because of what went on. I think from the decades of how statistics has demonstrated developmental delay on a rise, autism on a rise, they literally are afraid to have a child because they don't want to have a child that has that kind of a struggle. And we can understand that. We don't need to judge it and make any kind of inference about it. It's about, do I really know how to handle that? And I know that working with families, what families go through, and it is hard. It's very hard. And then sometimes it's just easier to let that go. That idea of having children in your family, it sometimes it's just easier to let it go. But then what happens long term of that physiological stress going on in their body? So I see a rise in stomach issues. I see a rise not only in children, young adults, middle aged, and elderly of anxiety and depression, bipolar, manic, things that people just, it's just on such a rise. Suicide. You hear this almost in any audience that you listen to today. What's going on that our minds and our bodies are being driven to a point that we don't think that we can go on? In our middle aged, there is weight gain, there is depression, anxiety, there is divorce, there is job loss. These, that's the common thread through this, is loss. And I think that impacts all of us on such an incredible level, because it isn't just the young people that lost a celebration of what they should be able to expect in high school, or what, job, even as an entrepreneur, that you set out to do. These have had incredible impacts on everybody. So what does it look like from a physiological? You can hear a lot of what might be going on in the mind, but avoidance in eating, or eating all the time. Remember, it's a one end or the other. It's arousal, either over aroused, under aroused. It's either going towards or pulling away. So you might be eating too much. You may not be eating enough. You may be withdrawing from social environment. You may be complaining of cold hands and feet all the time. Racy heart. What about racy mind? Unable to shut off and be able to just be peaceful with yourself. There are so many elements that can generate these physiological events. It can change the gastrointestinal system to where it can be a layer upon a layer, to where now you're battling either with constipation or diarrhea, or one time you're doing one and one time you're doing another. Headaches, teeth grinding, buzzing in your ears. Over time, memory issues, because the blood flow in the brain is going to shift, and it's going to go from the front of the brain to the back of the brain, because the body is anticipating, I've got to either run or fight. Just about any symptom can be broken down as either going towards or pulling away. Even diarrhea, constipation. Constipation is withdrawing. Diarrhea is going towards, but it's doing it in a hyper aroused state. So I would challenge you that anything that you're going through that does not seem right and you haven't been able to resolve, have a consultation. Just ask the questions. This is what I'm going through. Can you support me? Before we close, I want to go into the elderly population. We might think, because it is around us all the time, that we are supposed to get old, get sick, and that's it. And I really want to let you know that that is not the way we are divinely designed. You can change at any time. You really can. Things can happen, and it can be incredibly difficult. I'm going to share a story with you about my mom. I'm actually heading out tomorrow. I don't know when you'll be listening to this, but I'm going to go get my mom. I have been trying for over 4 years to gain guardianship of my mom. My mom has not been cared for, and it breaks my heart because of her passion, drive, finesse is what drove me as a young woman. And she's in a nursing home, and I am going to have to put her in a nursing home here, but I'm here. And she is in a very febile state. And it is going to take a long haul to move the needle. And things have happened to where if she gets afraid, she can come across combative. But when you're afraid, that's what the stress response would do. You would defend yourself. And so sometimes the way that she's been handled, it would scare her and she would try to push back, but not have the physical capability to do this. And we're talking about many, many years of things going in the wrong direction. Even all the way back to 2004, she had a stroke, which really changed her life. But she did get back up on her feet, and she was living on her own. And then there became layers that I'll put into a category of what we're going to call neuroimmune. And the next time, that's what we're going to focus on. Because what happens in a neuroimmune situation, and especially in the pediatric population, they're in an open window of development, where as we are older and we don't have that recovery fight or drive, it causes massive degeneration. And so what really has to happen is anyone is going to have to really be ready to roll up their sleeves and do the work. And we're going to have to approach it mechanical chemical brain. And we're going to have to meet her where she is and begin to walk this process backwards. And I can't say that I can get her standing on her feet, clicking her heels, but I absolutely know that we can improve the quality of her life. And she's 89 years old, and she is a trooper. So keep me in your prayers as I take on this new journey in my life. But I've been exposed to what's happening to our elderly population. And I don't understand why we are not embracing our parents, our loved ones. I know it's hard, and our system has got to change because the quality of life really does matter. And the more that you lay in that pattern where you're not getting the support that you need, it is furthering the chronic stress pattern in the brain, and it's literally burrowing itself deeper and deeper into the gyri of the brain. So the first thing that has to be done is we must become aware that there is the potential of a stress response, and it's been going on for a while, and we've got to turn it off so that we can begin to give recovery. I'm going to close with this last thought, and it is, even if you're suffering from chronic pain, pain generates what's called a nociceptor, and it only takes 10% of a nociceptive response to register pain in the brain. The other 90% feeds back into that autonomic nervous system and generates a stress response all over again. And every year that you are in chronic pain, you are losing 2.3 cubic centimeters of gray matter in your brain, and that is where you process information. So let's make a pact. We're going to become aware of stress. We're going to realize that stress can be mechanical. Feel it in your body. Stress is chemical. It's a bath. And stress does impact the brain. What are you going to do about it? Check us out. Go look at connectmybrain.com. Send me your information. Tell me you want to talk. Tell me when you're available. Call the office, 678-501-5172. It's time for all of us to get strong again. Be blessed.